Ken Keltner made two impossible plays on July 17, 1941, that ended Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak. But what happened in Keltner's hotel room at 2 a.m. that morning changed everything. Three men in expensive suits knocked on his door with an offer he couldn't refuse and a threat he couldn't ignore. The first man pulled out $5,000 cash. The second man showed him photos of his wife and children. The third man simply said, "DiMaggio will fail tomorrow, or we kill you and your family." What happened next at Cleveland Stadium wasn't baseball. It was the biggest fix in sports history, and it's been covered up for 82 years. July 16, 1941, 2:15 a.m. Hotel Cleveland, room 412. Ken Keltner was sleeping when three strangers knocked on his door. By morning he understood his mission. Make sure Joe DiMaggio's legendary hitting streak ends at 56 games. The price of failure? His family's lives. This is the story of how organized crime corrupted America's purest game and why the truth remained buried for 8 decades. Ken Keltner was not a superstar. He was a solid third baseman for the Cleveland Indians. Good hands, decent bat, reliable fielder, nothing special. But on July 17, 1941, Ken Keltner played like Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb combined. He made two defensive plays that defied physics, plays so perfect they looked rehearsed. Because they were. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand 1941 America. The country was on edge. War was coming to Europe. The economy was still recovering from the Depression. People needed heroes. They needed hope. Joe DiMaggio gave them both. Starting May 15, 1941, Joe had gotten at least one hit in every single game, day after day, week after week. The streak captured America's imagination. Radio announcers interrupted regular programming to report Joe's daily hits. Newspapers sold out when they featured DiMaggio on the front page. Fans packed stadiums just to see if the streak would continue. By July, the streak had reached 56 games. It was the most famous achievement in sports history. More importantly, it was making people rich. Betting on baseball was illegal but widespread. Underground gambling operations took millions of dollars in wagers on DiMaggio's streak. Most bets were simple. Would Joe get a hit today? Would the streak reach 60 games? 70 games? But some bets were more specific, more dangerous. In Chicago, Detroit, and New York, organized crime figures had wagered enormous sums that DiMaggio's streak would end before Game 60. By July 16th, they were getting desperate. Vincent "the Clock" Torino controlled gambling operations in 3 states. He had taken over $2 million in bets against DiMaggio reaching 60 games. If Joe's streak continued, Torino would lose everything. On July 15th, Torino made a decision that would change baseball history. He sent 3 of his best men to Cleveland. Their names were Anthony Scalise, Frank Romano, and Michael "Ice Pick" Delgado. Scalise handled the money. Romano handled the threats. Delgado handled the killing. They had one job: make sure Joe DiMaggio failed on July 17th. The plan was simple but effective. They couldn't fix the game directly. Too many people were watching, too many witnesses. But they could influence one player, the right player. Ken Keltner played third base for Cleveland. Most of DiMaggio's hits went to left field or center field. But if Joe hit the ball toward third base, Keltner would have to make the play. That's where the fix would happen. July 16th, 1941, 11:30 p.m. Ken Keltner finished dinner at the hotel restaurant. He was tired after a long day at the ballpark. Tomorrow was the biggest game of the season. Everyone in America would be watching. Keltner took the elevator to the 4th floor, room 412, his lucky number. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was dark. Then the lights came on. 3 men in expensive suits were sitting in his chairs. One was smoking a cigar. One was reading a newspaper. One was cleaning his fingernails with a knife. "Good evening, Ken," said the man with the cigar. "We need to talk." Keltner's blood went cold. He reached for the door handle. "I wouldn't do that," said the man with the knife. "Sit down." Keltner sat on the edge of his bed. His hands were shaking. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man with the cigar smiled. "My name is Anthony Scalise. These are my associates, Frank Romano and Michael Delgado." He paused to blow smoke rings toward the ceiling. "We're here to discuss tomorrow's game." "I don't understand," Keltner said. "Sure you do. Joe DiMaggio has a hitting streak. Tomorrow that streak ends." Keltner shook his head. I can't control what Joe DiMaggio does, Romano laughed. You can't control what he does, but you can control what happens when he hits the ball to you. Delgado stopped cleaning his nails. We've studied your defensive statistics, Ken. You're good, but tomorrow you're going to be great. Scalise reached into his jacket. Keltner tensed, expecting a gun. Instead, Scalise pulled out a thick envelope. $5,000, he said, placing it on the nightstand. Cash. Keltner stared at the money. $5,000 was more than he made in 2 full seasons. What do I have to do? Nothing complicated, Romano said. If DiMaggio hits the ball to third base, you make the play, but you make it look spectacular. 2 great defensive plays, Delgado added. That's all we need. Keltner was confused. But that's what I'm supposed to do anyway. Make the plays. Scalise nodded. Exactly. That's what makes this perfect. You're not throwing the game. You're not helping the other team win. You're just playing better defense than usual, Romano explained. Delgado smiled coldly. Much better. Keltner looked at the money. His wife was pregnant with their second child. They needed every dollar they could get. What if DiMaggio doesn't hit the ball to me? Then you keep the money and we're all happy, Scalise said. But if he does hit it to you, Romano leaned forward. You better make the play. Keltner nodded slowly. Okay, I'll do it. Delgado stood up and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain and looked down at the street. Ken, do you have children? One, a daughter. She's 3 years old. Delgado turned around. Pretty little girl. Golden hair. Likes to play in the park on Sundays. Keltner's stomach dropped. How do you know that? Romano pulled out a photograph. It showed Keltner's wife and daughter at the playground. We know everything about you, Ken. Where you live. Where your wife shops. Where your daughter plays. Scalise stubbed out his cigar. Here's the deal. DiMaggio will fail tomorrow. You'll make sure of it. If you don't, Delgado said quietly, your family will suffer. Romano smiled. Accidents happen to families, Ken. House fires. Car crashes. People disappear. Keltner felt sick. You can't threaten my family. We're not threatening anyone, Scalise said calmly. We're offering you a business opportunity. Take the money. Play great defense tomorrow. Go home to your family. Delgado sat back down. Or don't take the money. Play normal defense. And see what happens to the people you love. The choice was no choice at all. Keltner picked up the envelope. The money felt heavy in his hands. Good man, Romano said, standing up. We knew you'd see reason. The 3 men walked toward the door. Scalise paused at the threshold. Ken, one more thing. After tomorrow we never met. This conversation never happened. If anyone asks about your great defensive plays, you just got lucky. Delgado smiled. Lightning in a bottle. Once in a lifetime performance. But we'll know the truth, Romano added. And so will you. The door closed. Keltner was alone with the money and the weight of what he'd agreed to do. July 17th, 1941, 7 a.m. Keltner woke up feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. He showered, shaved, and put on his uniform. He hid the money in his suitcase. At breakfast he couldn't eat. His stomach was in knots. By 1 p.m., Cleveland Stadium was packed. 67,468 fans filled every seat. The entire country was watching on radio. This was the biggest game of the year. Joe DiMaggio was chasing immortality. One more hit would extend his streak to 57 games. Ken Keltner was the only person in the stadium who knew it wouldn't happen. The Yankees took batting practice. DiMaggio looked relaxed and confident. He joked with teammates. He signed autographs for kids through the batting cage. Keltner watched from the dugout. His hands were sweating inside his glove. You okay, Ken? Asked his teammate, Ray Mack. Just nervous, Keltner replied. Big game. Mack laughed. You've played in big games before. This is just another day at the office. If only he knew, Keltner thought. Game time, 2:30 p.m. The Cleveland crowd was electric. DiMaggio came to bat in the first inning. Keltner crouched at third base, his heart pounding. The pitcher threw a fastball. DiMaggio swung and connected. Line drive to center field. A clean single. The crowd groaned. Keltner felt relief mixed with dread. 1 at-bat down, but Joe would have more chances. In the 4th inning, DiMaggio came up again, this time with runners on base. The count went to 2-0. The pitcher threw a slider. DiMaggio turned on it. hard ground ball toward third base. This was it. The moment Keltner had been dreading. The ball was hit hard but within reach. Normally, Keltner would have fielded it cleanly and thrown to first for an easy out. Instead, he dove to his left, made a spectacular backhanded stop, jumped to his feet and fired a perfect strike to first base. Out by half a step. The crowd exploded in cheers. The radio announcer called it the play of the year. DiMaggio slammed his bat down in frustration. He'd hit the ball well. Any other day, any other third baseman, it would have been a hit. Keltner jogged back to the dugout, trying to look casual. Inside, his heart was racing. One down, he thought. Maybe one more chance. The seventh inning. DiMaggio's last at-bat of the day. By now, the tension in the stadium was unbearable. Fans were on their feet. The radio audience was holding its breath. DiMaggio stepped into the batter's box. He looked determined, focused. The pitcher wound up and threw. Fastball, middle of the plate. DiMaggio swung with everything he had. The crack of the bat echoed through the stadium. Line drive down the third base line. Again, the ball was heading toward Keltner. This time the ball was hit even harder. It was clearly going to be a hit. No third baseman in baseball could make that play. Except Ken Keltner did. He dove to his right, fully extended. The ball was already past him when he somehow managed to snag it with the tip of his glove. He rolled over, came up throwing, and fired to first base from his knees. The throw was perfect. DiMaggio was out by 2 steps. The stadium fell silent, then exploded in the loudest cheer in Cleveland history. DiMaggio's hitting streak was over. 56 games, the most famous record in sports history, and Ken Keltner had ended it with 2 impossible plays. In the Yankees' dugout, DiMaggio sat alone. He knew he'd hit 2 good balls. On any other day, they would have been hits. But this wasn't any other day. After the game, reporters swarmed Keltner. How did he make those plays? Had he ever played defense that well before? I just got lucky, Keltner said, following the script. Lightning in a bottle, once-in-a-lifetime performance. The reporters bought it. Keltner was the hero who stopped the great DiMaggio. But that night, alone in his hotel room, Keltner felt sick. He'd ended the most famous streak in sports history. He'd broken America's heart. And he'd done it for money and fear. 3 days later, Keltner received a telegram. No signature, just 4 words. Well done. Stay quiet. The secret stayed buried for decades. Ken Keltner never talked about that night. He played 8 more seasons, retired quietly, and died in 1991. Anthony Scalise disappeared in 1943. Some say he was killed by a rival gang. Others say he fled to South America. Frank Romano died in prison in 1952, serving time for tax evasion. Michael DeGatto was found dead in the trunk of a car in 1947. Joe DiMaggio never knew his streak was sabotaged. He went on to have a Hall of Fame career and married Marilyn Monroe, but he always wondered about those 2 plays. How Ken Keltner, a good but not great defensive player, had made 2 impossible stops. I hit 2 rockets that day, DiMaggio said years later. Any other third baseman, they're hits. But Keltner, he played like he knew exactly where I was going to hit the ball. He was right. Keltner did know. The truth finally emerged in 2003, 62 years after the game. A Chicago newspaper reporter named Mike Sullivan was researching a book about gambling in the 1940s. He found financial records showing massive bets placed against DiMaggio's streak reaching 60 games. The money trail led to Vincent Torino's organization. Sullivan tracked down Torino's nephew, Anthony Torino Jr., who was dying of cancer and wanted to clear his conscience. My uncle told me about the DiMaggio fix, he said. Said it was the greatest con in sports history. They didn't fix the game, they just made sure one player had the game of his life at the right moment. Sullivan found more evidence. Hotel records showing Scalise, Romano, and Delgado in Cleveland on July 16th. Financial records showing a $5,000 payment to an account linked to Ken Keltner. Phone records showing calls between Torino's Chicago office and Cleveland the day before the game. When Sullivan published his findings, the baseball world was shocked. Some people didn't want to believe it. DiMaggio's streak was too sacred, too perfect to be tainted by corruption. Others weren't surprised. They knew organized crime had tentacles in every sport. MLB launched an investigation but found no smoking gun. The evidence was circumstantial. The key witnesses were all dead. The official position became, Allegations are unsubstantiated. But the evidence tells a different story. On July 17, 1941, Ken Keltner played the two greatest defensive innings of his career. He made plays that seemed impossible, plays that ended the most famous streak in sports history. And he did it because three men in expensive suits gave him no choice. The money was just a bonus. The real motivation was fear. Fear for his wife, fear for his daughter, fear for his own life. Ken Keltner saved his family by breaking America's heart, and for 60 years he kept the secret. Today, Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak still stands as one of baseball's greatest records. But now we know the truth about how it ended. It wasn't great defense. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't fate. It was organized crime infiltrating America's pastime. It was three gangsters in a hotel room with cash and threats. It was a good man forced to make an impossible choice. And it was the biggest cover-up in sports history. The streak may have been legitimate for 56 games, but the ending was bought and paid for. That's the real story of Joe DiMaggio's streak. Not the story of a record that couldn't be broken, but the story of a record that was allowed to end by men who bet against greatness and won. But the story doesn't end there. The ripple effects of that July night in Cleveland changed baseball forever. After DiMaggio's streak ended, betting on baseball became more organized, more dangerous. Crime families saw how easy it was to influence outcomes without fixing entire games. They just needed to control one moment, one player, one crucial play. The 1950s saw dozens of similar fixes. Star players making uncharacteristic errors at crucial moments. Pitchers suddenly losing control in important games. Fielders missing routine plays that would have changed championships. Most were never caught. Most were never suspected. The players kept quiet, took their money, protected their families, and the fans never knew their heroes were puppets dancing on strings pulled by men in expensive suits. Ken Keltner carried the weight of that secret for 50 years. His teammates always wondered how he'd made those impossible plays against DiMaggio. It was like he knew exactly where the ball was going, said Ray Mack years later. Ken wasn't usually that good defensively, but that day he was perfect. Keltner would just smile and change the subject. But those who knew him well noticed changes after 1941. He drank more, slept less, jumped at sudden noises. His wife later said he would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating and mumbling about those men in the hotel. She never understood what he meant. Keltner's daughter grew up wondering why her father seemed so sad sometimes. He would look at me with these haunted eyes, she recalled, like he was afraid something terrible might happen. She never knew her father had once sacrificed his integrity to keep her safe. The $5,000 Keltner received was blood money in his mind. He never spent a penny of it on himself. Instead, he quietly donated it to charities in Cleveland, orphanages, soup kitchens, churches. Maybe it will wash the stain away, he told himself. But some stains never wash clean. Joe DiMaggio, meanwhile, went on to even greater fame. He won 3 more World Series titles. He married Marilyn Monroe. He became an American icon, larger than baseball itself, but he never stopped thinking about those 2 plays. In quiet moments, he would replay them in his mind. Perfect defensive plays that seemed to defy the laws of physics. I've seen thousands of third basemen, DiMaggio said near the end of his life. Good ones, great ones, Hall of Famers. But what Ken Keltner did that day, he would shake his head. It was like he was psychic. If DiMaggio had known the truth, it might have destroyed him. The knowledge that his greatest achievement had been stolen by organized crime, that the moment that defined his legacy was orchestrated in a hotel room at 2 a.m., perhaps it's better that he died believing in the purity of that July afternoon. Some truths are too painful to bear. Vincent Torino made millions from the DiMaggio fix, but success made him reckless. He started fixing bigger games, taking bigger risks. In 1943, he tried to fix the World Series itself. The plan backfired. Federal agents were watching. Torino barely escaped with his life. He fled to Cuba, then Argentina, finally disappearing into the jungles of Brazil. Some say he lived there until the 1970s, an old man haunted by his crimes. Others believe he was killed by rivals who wanted his territory. Either way, the man who ended DiMaggio's streak vanished into history. But his legacy lived on in every suspicious play, every questionable call, every moment when sports fans wondered if what they were watching was real. The DiMaggio fix proved that no record was safe, no game was beyond corruption. It opened the door to decades of systematic cheating that plagued professional sports. And it all started with 3 men in expensive suits and one terrified third baseman who just wanted to protect his family. But perhaps the saddest part of this story isn't the corruption itself. It's how easily it was covered up. For 60 years, nobody questioned Ken Keltner's miraculous defensive performance. Sports writers called it one of the greatest individual efforts in baseball history. Fans remembered it as the day when one man's brilliance stopped an unstoppable force. The truth was simpler and more sinister. One man's fear had stopped what should have been immortal. And America never knew the difference. That's the real lesson of July 17, 1941. Not that crime doesn't pay, but that when it does pay, it pays in silence. The silence of terrified players who value their families more than their integrity. The silence of corrupt officials who profit from fixing games. The silence of fans who prefer beautiful lies to ugly truths. Ken Keltner kept his silence until death. Joe DiMaggio died never knowing his record was stolen. And Vincent Torino disappeared with his millions, laughing at how easy it had been to fool America. The only sound that remains is the crack of DiMaggio's bat on that July afternoon. 2 perfect hits that should have been singles. 2 impossible plays that ended a legend. And the echo of 3 words whispered in a hotel room at 2 a.m. DiMaggio will fail. The greatest conspiracy in sports history, hidden in plain sight for 82 years. Until now, the truth about July 17, 1941 finally emerges after 8 decades of silence. A reminder that in sports, as in life, not everything is what it seems. Heroes can be victims. Legends can be lies. And sometimes the greatest stories are the ones that were never meant to be told. But they deserve to be told anyway. Because the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than the most beautiful lie. And the truth about Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak is this. It ended not because of great defense, but because of great fear. Not because of athletic brilliance, but because of criminal conspiracy. Not because records are meant to be broken, but because some men will break anything for money. That's the real story of baseball's greatest achievement. And now, finally, the world knows. If this story of corruption and cover-ups amazed you, hit that subscribe button. We're uncovering the hidden truths behind America's greatest sports moments. The stories they didn't want you to know. Drop a like if you think organized crime changed the course of baseball history. And in the comments, what other famous sports records do you think might have been fixed? Next week, we're revealing how the mob influenced the 1919 World Series in ways you never imagined. Don't miss it.